Brains in Motion with Mary McKone, EdD and Angela Zielinski, DPT. Please remember that this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. This is not medical advice, and this is just general discussion for educational purposes. Thank you. Enjoy. Hi, Mary. Welcome back to our emotional regulation case study.
Thanks. So good to hear and see you again.
The last time we met, we talked about sensory processing for this case study, and we talked a lot about how reflex work involves a lot of foundational work, and a lot of that foundational work has to do with really helping the body feel safe.
Yes.
And that is through the sensory system, right, Mary?
Yes.
Part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we don't have good proprioception or vestibular, then our brain is not really secure in where we are and what our relationship with gravity is, as we talked about last time. And yeah, that can make us feel insecure and make us stay in a sympathetic state, which we're going to talk about in a little bit.
And we talked a lot about prepping the system to get ready to change. So if it doesn't matter if you do all the reflex work in the world, if your body is not ready to make a change, it might even fight you. It's not going to. At least that's my experience.
100%, which is why I start with every kid doing proprioceptive work, gentle rocking, lots of embracing squeeze, because the brain has to know that this is safe work. And I would say 95% of the kids I work with have proprioceptive deficits. So when we take the time to really make sure that the foundation of that house is strong, and that includes the proprioceptive vestibular, right? Auditory, visual are a little bit higher up in our development, but then that sets the stage and preps things so that when we do the deeper work of the reflexes, the brain's like, oh, I have good proprioception and vestibular, or developing proprioception and vestibular, and I know what to do this new information that you're giving me.
Yes. I know what to do. I like that. So for our case study of this specific example, or if you have any kiddo that's coming to see you for emotional regulation, starting point, foundation is safety, proprioception, vestibular.
Yes.
And now we're going to move to neuroreflexes.
All right.
Mary, will you give us a brief overview of just how that links for our listeners, please?
Absolutely. So just as a reminder, I feel like we say this every single episode, that primitive reflexes are present at birth and have a reflexive motor response, meaning it's stereotyped, it's the same every time, to specific sensory input. Postural reflexes also do have a response to stimuli, but they're a more global stimulus, a change in position, a move forward. So the system, the reflexes are still reacting like TLR, STNR, ATNR, but it's a more global kind of sensory input as opposed to like stroking the side of the face or stroking up the side of the foot, right, with the primitive reflex. And the primitive reflexes and postural reflexes, those should integrate. They become part of our toolbox instead of being dominant, so that we can move to higher level control in our brain, which is what allows for emotional regulation. If we're working out of our brainstem, primarily at the bottom part of our brain, we don't get emotional regulation because our limbic system is ruling the day. So we have to get up into thalamus, basal ganglia, insular cortex, prefrontal cortex in order to have that emotional control. So some of the key reflexes related to emotional regulation: hands, mouth, and feet. Hands, mouth, and feet. Why would those be connected to emotional regulation? And these are rooting, sucking, Babkin, Palmer, Plantar, Babinski. And Angela, in your training, and I know you're an infant specialist, why do you think those reflexes have so much to do with emotional security and regulation?
Well, because they're your main survival. You have to be able to eat. You have to be able to survive, and you have to be able to grasp on to, and then Babinski for crawling. Like, for infants, right, with the starting of skin to skin, if you place a baby on a mom's chest and you've had a vaginal birth and everything's gone well, let's say, and everything has integrated, a little newborn baby will start to crawl to find the breast. And they use their hands, mouth, and feet to search and find it and to latch and to start that process of survival.
Yes, absolutely. And the vast majority of the kids that I work with had some hiccup, if it's mild, or major trauma in the birth process. And a lot of them didn't even get that opportunity because they're whisked away to NICU.
Yeah.
Right. And so they didn't get that opportunity, and they didn't get that activation of the proprioception coming through the birth canal with all of the contractions and having that experience, like you were talking about, of being skin to skin with mom. And then, grasping, both plantar and palmar are about security. We've talked about that before, that we hold on to things. And when those remain retained, there is this sense of insecurity and anxiety that comes along with that. Another reflex really involved with emotional regulation is tonic labyrinthine, or TLR, because that's about postural control and gravitational insecurity. Do I understand my relationship with gravity in this big, bold world that we live in? And when kids toe walk, it usually has a lot to do with a lack of understanding about relationship with gravity, vestibular system, which the TLR is very involved in vestibular as well. Anything you'd like to add on there?
I agree.
What you said.
No, it is a big one, and it's one where it helps establish that relationship to gravity, and if you don't establish that midline and that upright, you're always searching for a midline, or you're always searching for stability. And if you're always searching for stability, it's very tiring, and it can make you very uncomfortable on a very low level, and it just builds up, and that makes it hard to be emotionally regulated if you're always just moving slightly, or your body's always like, "Oh, where are you? Nah, are you upright? I'm not really sure. I think you are." And so
Uh-huh.
it's just a lot of uncertainty is what I think of with that.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And I was watching a video of a kid today who is doing this heel toe walk, which is something I use for plantar. And the whole time, their whole torso was slightly turned to one side. And I'm like, oh, we still don't know where midline is yet, right? So he's rotated a good deal of the time. All right, another one which we talk about all the time is ATNR. So many things involved that would be related to emotional regulation and security, coordination, midline crossing, bilateral integration, auditory processing,
Visual processing.
visual processing. So I will speak to the auditory piece from personal experience. Again, here comes the brain injury story, but I think I've told this story that after my brain injury 8 years ago, I was very auditorily sensitive. The anxiety I felt when people spoke to me was ridiculous. My heart rate went up. I started to get sweaty palms. My breathing became shallow, like I was almost hyperventilating. I felt like I was going to cry a lot of the time. I could not process what they were saying. And loud spaces, I just wanted to curl up literally in a ball under my desk at work. So thinking about ATNR, auditory processing, which we covered in those other episodes, if that auditory system is underdeveloped, it can really cause a great deal of anxiety, which then leads to emotional dysregulation for some people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How about spinal galant?
Spinal galant is one that can contribute to restlessness and irritability because it's on your back. Your back is a huge part, and if you have an unintegrated spinal galant, your shirt could be hitting it all day long. And so on a
Yes.
low level, or the back of your chair, or somebody comes by and just taps you on the back, it could be the most threatening thing because galant is on too high trying to help you. and everything comes as a threat, and it's behind you, so you can't see it. So there's that extra added layer.
Mhm. Yeah, and kids with an active spinal glut and older kids, they do tend to really not like having people behind them, or, somebody walking up behind them will really make them startle in fear.
Mhm. Oh, Mary, what about Moro?
What about Moro? Yeah, so I'll say this again, that Moro and fear paralysis are reactions, responses. They aren't developmental reflexes. When Moro appears right at birth, it is a response to the change in head position coming out of the birth canal. It is spurred by the change, right, the head position and the activation of the vestibular system in a gravitational laden environment, which did not exist in utero. So all of a sudden, now they're born and they tilt backwards to take their first breath of life. And now their brain's like, oh my goodness, what is this gravity situation? And then babies open up their arms and their legs and they go into Moro. I know it is all over the internet. Do this for Moro, do that for Moro. But if Moro is truly still active, if a child still puts their arms out like 45 degrees from their body, when their head goes back and their legs move, it is a rarity that I actually see that response active. What we're really seeing, when people say Moro is active because they meet the checklist, is that the autonomic nervous system is in sympathetic or sympathetic for Moro. So I think those terms have really gotten mixed up in the common way that reflexes are spoken about. Do some kids have an actual active Moro? Yes. I have also read in the research literature, we talk a lot about the position of legs between fear paralysis and Moro, that a lot of the research says leg position actually is not very consistent.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, after infancy, that's not a very good way to decide if it is a true Moro. The arms would be a better indicator. But also that proprioceptive auditory or vestibular stimuli could also stimulate a Moro response. So there is a lot of back and forth and arguments out there too about this is fear paralysis and that's Moro. But if you look at it through a polyvagal lens, fear paralysis is dorsal vagal. That's protection. Moro would be sympathetic, which is fight or flight. So just thinking about that. So yeah, if we do see that the autonomic nervous system is in sympathetic or dorsal vagal, what that tells you is that the brain does not feel safe. Why? Is it proprioceptive? Is it vestibular? Is it postural control? Is it sensory processing? What is it that's causing the brain to say, I don't feel safe? And that helps you decide where to start or how to address it, right? When reflexes stay retained, it can lead to heightened stress responses, like we just talked about, poor sensory modulation and regulation, difficulty with transitions and flexibility. Part of our stress response is to want to control things because it's safe. So we have difficulty with transitions because that's different and what I know is safe. And what's different may not be safe. And you can tell me 16 times, oh, we're just going to the grocery store. But I don't know. Are we really going to the grocery store? Maybe the grocery store is loud and scary. And that transition into that might be loud and scary. And then when reflexes are retained, as we mentioned, we have more activity in the brainstem than we really do in the neocortex and the prefrontal cortex. And emotional regulation is primarily a PFC, prefrontal cortex activity. I'm not saying that is the only part of the brain, but that is the great executor of our brain. It tells everybody else, you do that, you do that, you do that, and everybody work together nicely like an orchestra conductor.
Yeah. And like you taught us, emotions live in the limbic system. So if we can't get to the prefrontal cortex, then regulation is very, very challenging. If we don't have a smooth path, then And to me, I think of smooth path as reflex integration. The better integrated your reflexes are, the smoother the path to being able to regulate.
Yes, absolutely. So when we think about the reflexes and this particular case study, for this kiddo, they were on the later end of most of their developmental milestones. Some were quite late. They did not crawl on all fours, mostly Bower crawl, amphibian commando crawl, but did not do that until 10 months of age. Normally, that would be about 6 months. They did not walk until 20 months of age, which is outside the window, and that was after physical therapy. I met this child remotely. At 3, they were still clumsy, really unstable when running, kind of fell a lot, had a really stiff neck. And as I sent parents the assessments and they sent this back to me, we found Palmer, Plantar, Babkin, Babinski. So hands, mouth, and feet. TLR in both flexion and extension, because TLR has 2. ATNR, Bower crawling, spinal gallant, spinal Perez, hands pulling, which is also called pull to sit. When parents pulled on the wrist to bring them up, the head completely lagged back like a brand new baby. Landau, STNR, and head rating. All of those were still present.
And that's because reflexes do not exist in isolation.
That is correct. Yeah. So if TLR is still active in flexion or extension, most likely you're going to have issues with head rating.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just going to happen. Same with spinal Perez. If spinal Perez, like if babies hated tummy time or they didn't get enough of it, or then they're not getting that practice bringing that trunk up and being able to stabilize their neck and start getting that neck control, which is important for head rating. Yeah.
Yeah. And usually if head rating isn't there, pulling to sit or hands pulling has a lag, because all of that has to do with head control and coordination and timing.
Yes.
And SPNR.
Yes.
Yeah. No, this, to me, that I was going to say, I've worked with a couple littles of when you talked about how tonic labyrinthine reflex, TLR, and gravitational insecurity, that late walkers tend to have that, like maybe they'll walk and keep touching the wall, but they have a hard time letting go of the wall. And TLR doesn't exist in isolation. There's more to it than that.
Yes.
But is one of the ones that are challenging to help kids to convince their bodies, again, proprioception, but TLR plays a big role in that late walking gravitational insecurity.
Yeah. And at least from my experience, when you're dealing with an older child, 8, 9, 10, 16, that's had TLR active for that long, it is really, really hard to integrate. It takes a while because they've built all these compensatory strategies to stay upright in the world. And so the body doesn't like to give up those compensations. So it takes a lot of what we call repatterning, a lot of repatterning. I mean, I usually spend months on TLR, just gently working through kind of every little step so that we can let the body know, like, no, it's okay. It's okay to let that one go. And sometimes we work on it a little bit and then we'll do some other reflexes and come back to it.
Yes.
Because everything works in together, right? No reflex works in isolation. Same thing with hands grasp, right? Sometimes I'll start on hands grasp, get through like activation where we're activating the grasp, leave it for a while, do a lot of things involving the arms, because that's when we mature to a mature grasp is once we've already learned how to use our arms separate from our body.
Yeah.
So,
I agreed. Yep. I like that. Yes. And I feel like a lot of safety, right? Like a lot of reapproaching with embrace and like you might start with a lot of embrace and squeeze. Maybe you fall off of it a little bit and then you might come back to it more frequently as you, just to help that body be ready to change again. Like when there's insecurity, bodies need to be on board to change.
That is a great segue. So thanks for queuing us up. Yeah, because let's talk a little bit about the vagus nerve and emotional regulation. So vagus nerve, autonomic nervous system, and emotional regulation. So the vagus nerve is what regulates our autonomic nervous system, our parasympathetic, sympathetic, and dorsal vagal states of our nervous system. So as we've been kind of, touching on already, we have the parasympathetic state of our vagus nerve, which is rest and digest. This is where we want to be. The world is happy. I have good social relationships. I can communicate. I'm open to change. I'm open to new experiences. That's all when we're in a happy place, right? The world is good. I'm digesting my food. I eliminate it well. There's no constipation. I mean, there are other things that get in the way. But when you go into protection, that it can be one of the symptoms of that, because you hold everything in. And sympathetic is what we all know is fight or flight. But if you read Stephen Porges's book, Safe and Sound, the first half of it is such a really brilliant, this is his work, right? This is his life's work. So he did a brilliant job of explaining his own research and theories. But even within sympathetic, there's some variations there. Our nervous system is quite fluid, and we can be in parasympathetic and sympathetic at the same time, actually. So say that we wanted to play basketball with our friends, and it's a competitive game. We're really enjoying it, parasympathetic, but we've got our competitive edge on, and so we need that extra energy of sympathetic so we can kind of move between these states as we need them. And then dorsal vagal, that's protection, that is shut down, that is withdrawal. So when we're there, the brain says, oh, you're not safe at all. The world is a giant threat, and we're not going to be able to fight our way out of this. So we're just going to come back here. I'm invisible. You can't see me. We often see like shallow breath, whispery voices sometimes. Kids who don't talk a lot, selective mutism can be part of this even. You get that deer in the headlight look where, eyes have a really hard time moving out of midline or accommodating. What else do we see in fear paralysis? A withdrawal socially. That's a big one, right? We're not in more profound cases of autism. We see a lot of fear paralysis where we have withdrawn into our own world, which is what the word autism literally means. We have withdrawn completely. We're not interested in anything else that's around us. That is a protective mechanism of our nervous system. So for children, when we have a dysregulated vagal tone, meaning like there's something called vagal brake, which it's like the ability of the vagus nerve to basically calm itself down. So we're in sympathetic, but it's like, oh, that's not so bad, vagal brake. And then we can kind of move back into parasympathetic. When we don't have that kind of regulation of our nervous system, we have a real difficult time recovering from stress. So it could be something as simple as there was a change in our schedule at school, and what we thought was going to happen is not what happened. It could be a fire alarm at school, or it could be we had an assembly today, or that may take a kid the rest of the day to regulate from because they don't have that fluidity in their nervous system. And for some kids, that results in meltdowns or behavioral dysregulation, crying, behaviors and emotions, as we talked about before, are so tied together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, and it's important to note because when we talk about emotional regulation, the key word is regulation, because we want to be able to stretch and do new challenges and be able to try new things. But if our state is so dysregulated and we don't know safety, you can't stretch because you're always uncomfortable. So you need to be able to feel that comfort for a little bit, so then you can get uncomfortable and then know you can come back and be comfortable. That's the key, so that you can regulate it and not just be in one state all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And as adults, we often face these experiences where we're really nervous about something, but it's exciting at the same time. And how are we going to get through this? Like a great example, I did a TED Talk like 10 years ago or something, a TEDx talk. And I was so excited about it, and I was very well prepared. But the hour, 2 hours beforehand, like I was in the back room, I thought I was going to throw up all over. Like I was so nervous, and I've done a lot of public speaking, so it's not like I haven't done this, but being on that stage and having the cameras, and it was live and there was no retakes, and I've got 500 people in that audience listening to me. Yeah, it was a little nerve-wracking, but I have a pretty good nervous system, so I was able to do deep breaths and sit in hookups and work my way through it, and then when I stepped on the stage, I could do it. But for a lot of our kids, they don't have that flexibility, that fluidity in their nervous system, and so it shows up like emotional dysregulation.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. How did it show up in your case study, Mary?
Yeah. I mean, this is the primary reason they came to me, right? Was emotional dysregulation. So this child would freeze and withdraw, would cling to mom in social situations, like would not leave her lap, would not socialize with peers, avoided children at birthday parties or the park, just really kind of terrified of interacting with other children, and needed intense co-regulation, but only with mom, and had a really hard time recovering from stress with episodes of intense crying and emotional distress. So drop off at preschool could be a 45-minute emotional turmoil situation. And, that so impacts quality of life for the family, right? And mom, we all love our kids, but at some point you're like, could you go to somebody else for a while?
Right. Or you have to work. You have to make money to live.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, yeah, she definitely, her autonomic nervous system was really teetering between dorsal vagal and sympathetic, but we were not getting into parasympathetic. We just weren't even touching on that. So, when you look at the whole picture, you're like, oh, well, we were late on all of these milestones, some of them quite significantly late. So we know that those neural connections weren't made. So our limbic system is ruling the day because most of our activity is happening at the brainstem level, not a lot happening in the neocortex and prefrontal cortex. Right.
Yeah. It's hard, I think, because of the verbiage and the explanation of like, okay, we're talking about polyvagal theory and primitive reflexes, and just understanding that reflex integration helps with integrating and vagus nerve regulation. So
it does. Yes,
yes.
absolutely. Yes.
And so,
yeah, and vice versa, that if we're
yes.
in sympathetic and or dorsal vagal, particularly dorsal vagal, the brain is really resistant to change, like because the world is not safe, right? So that's why it becomes a priority. So when I talk about like prepping the kiddo for the deeper work things that I normally do is lots of proprioceptive input. Like I use naval radiation. For our listeners, I use a variety of modalities. So I use like naval radiation, which is like body mapping, basically. Embracing squeeze, neurotactile from MNRI. I use some gentle rocking motions from RMTI, pre-birth movements from both RMTI and MNRI, which are called pre-birth and archetype movements. And the reason I do the pre-birth movements is usually in utero was a time of safety and security. So if we reach back and say, hey, remember these movements you used to do that were not reflexive, that and the world was safe there, the brain remembers that, and it makes movement feel okay. Like, oh yeah, I remember this movement pattern. That's really cool. I could do that. That would be okay. And I'm just going to kind of outline the approach that I took, and then we can talk about what I might do differently or what you would do. Please, jump in. So for her, I started with hand supporting. She didn't have good personal boundaries and didn't have an awareness of where her body started and stopped and where others started and stopped. And hand supporting is really good for that. And then we did some Bower crawling and worked through that one. And we immediately started noticing less big emotions, and her climbing and physical coordination started improving. By the third month, because the first 6 weeks was all the preparation stuff, I introduced trunk extension, which is also called Volmer, and then all of a sudden she was able to go to a grandparent and not just mom, which is awesome, and started having less separation anxiety. And was even able to go to a birthday party, but didn't participate, but was able to go, right? Month 4, I introduced Landau, and she demonstrated much more confidence in her physical abilities, was walking upstairs using a hand railing, which was new. She used to be terrified of walking upstairs. And then we kind of went through like Palmer and then plantar, Babinski, rooting, and sucking all at once. And this is where I would do things differently. So now, because we worked together a year and a half, I would do hands, mouth, and feet right after the preparation stuff. I just want to point that out to our listeners that I'm like Angela, I'm constantly rethinking my own practice and how to be more effective and efficient for kids and what's going to give us the biggest bonus for that particular kid at the beginning. So yeah, I would
We're always learning, growing, and changing, right? And thank you for sharing this with us. I often start with Babinski, but I also almost always start with embrace and squeeze, right?
Yeah,
so like you cover a lot of stuff. And if you do embrace and squeeze on the hands and the feet too, you're covering some ground anyways.
Yeah,
so
Palmer and plantar for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And then by month 7, we'd moved into ATNR. And at this point, she started playing with other kids at school, talking about them when she came home.
That's great.
The bedwetting stopped. And this child had a thing where she would spit her food out all the time. And that stopped.
Cool.
Yeah. So we were still working on hands, mouth, and feet in month 7, because that takes a couple of months to get all the way through those protocols. And then we moved into TLR and then STNR. And after STNR, she was able to get up and do a recital with her class, started going to birthday parties and the park and interacting with kids and talking about people that she had interacted with. And by month 11, she'd really come out of her shell. She was climbing and jumping and stair climbing and running and had play skills. And by month 13, I was able to exit this particular kiddo. And then I referred them to a myofunctional therapist because the child still had some tongue thrust.
That's amazing. So this little girl went from shutting down and being unable to participate in the world to participating at an age-appropriate level.
Absolutely.
So cool.
Yeah, it made me really happy. And it was only 13 months. And in my head, it was longer than that, which is probably why I said I worked with her for a year and a half. Yeah, it was 13 months. I will say the family was very, very, very diligent. 4 days a week without fail. That's all I asked my families for. 4 days a week, about 20 minutes of movement, rarely missed unless, they got a round of the flu or whatever, but incredibly consistent. And consistency matters in this work.
Yes. I would like to point out that while that may seem long to some people, the way Mary did it was more sustainable change. Because sometimes we can do things quickly and you get a brief improvement, but the system doesn't know how to handle it. It doesn't quite know how to access it. And so if you do it slowly like this, and if you do it building one off of the other, the system understands how to access it again and again and again. And that consistency helps with that regulation. Again, regulation is what we're looking for, not just feel better once and then a bigger meltdown a week later, right?
Right, absolutely. And I have this like calming protocol I put together for, I grabbed some things from a variety of modalities, but it includes like tapping and embracing squeeze and a couple of rocking motions, naval radiation from Brain Gym, but they're all things that calm the nervous system. So sometimes when I'm working with a kiddo, we did this with this kiddo, something might be going on, like, they got sick and all of a sudden they're, inflamed and they get dysregulated, or there was something happened at school or whatever. And it's like, okay, you know what? Let's pause the regular program we were doing. Let's just do calming protocol for a week.
Yes.
Right? I really can't stress this enough to people that paying attention to their nervous system should be the order of the day Nothing else matters if you're overstimulating a kid or you don't acknowledge that they're elevated or they're moving into sympathetic. Even if you're in the middle of a session, I know we've talked about this, Angela, and you're like, oh, that was not right for this kid at this moment, right? You have to like change and then like, okay, that didn't work and now we're a little elevated. So what can I do? Maybe we need to sit and do some bracing squeeze before we move on and do something completely different. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, because I think that part of when you do in-person work is I am not the parent and I am not the caregiver. So I have the ability to, when I become a safe adult, a little bit extra ability to stretch kids that they normally wouldn't allow from other people. And sometimes we stretch too far. And so we got to come back and help their nervous system know that they're safe and to, like you said, regulate. And like the beauty of doing it with a therapist is I'm not mom, right? So I can, or I'm not the caregiver. And so let's say we work together, we get calm. I can then introduce the caregiver to help me re-regulate. And we've just practiced emotional regulation and practiced in a safe way how the nervous system can respond. And it was safe. And now we get to go play. And it sets up such a cool thing of like, they have this experience that, oh, I was uncomfortable for a little bit, but I'm okay and I'm fun and let's do this again. And so
Yeah.
it's a nice way, like that's how I think of it.
That's great. And you're introducing co-regulation when there's something that's scary. To me, it's kind of like, we're at the park with our granddaughter and she, falls off the slide, because she came down too fast. And she looks up at you like, I don't know, should I cry? Am I okay? And you look at her like, oh, Bunk, you're okay. And then you help him back up and give him a big hug. And then she's off and running, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly the same kind of thing, which we do instinctively with our kids. But in this kind of environment, I think that sometimes, our culture in the U.S. is more, no pain, no gain. And that does not apply to this work. Less is more.
Yeah.
And please pay attention to the state of the nervous system. It's not just behavior. Behaviors always tell you something.
Yeah. I think, and the less is more, also acknowledging what is happening in your life at that time, because kids are actually really sensitive. You might not think they're picking up on it, but like, are you moving? Is there a new sibling coming into play? Has mom been sick? Like all of that is also contributing to nervous system input. So sometimes the less is more of, well, the child might not be in school, but what's happening around them? So it might be time to do just the calming strategies because of what's going on around them is what I've found too. Sometimes I forget that piece of like asking what's coming next at home.
Mm-hmm. God, that's such a great point. I had a parent tell me one day that they had a grandparent pass away like the previous year. And mom had gotten sick recently, and the child said, "Is mommy going to die like grandma?"
Oh,
Right? And so,
yeah.
like, there was this elevation that was going on, this anxiety and emotional dysregulation because mom had a bad flu or something, and they were associating that with missing grandma. So it, again, nervous system, look at what's going on with the behavior. What does the behavior tell you? Behaviors are just information. Whatever that behavior is, that might be hand flapping, that might be pacing. It doesn't have to be like an aggressive, like normally, like we think about behaviors as like negative things, but I just mean, what's the child doing? What information are they given to you from the way that they're acting, whatever that is? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting because your case study, the more organized on the inside she became, the
Mm-hmm.
more emotionally regulated she was able to become. She had clearer pathways to that prefrontal cortex, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
And because of that, then her nervous system became more fluid and she was able to move into parasympathetic. And then what did we see? Better social interaction, friendships, being open to new experiences, going to birthday parties with people she didn't know and making a friend, like those things don't happen when we're in protection and survival. So when people ask me questions about, like I saw today a question in the Facebook group about what's the relationship between safe and sound protocol and reflex integration, which is safe and sound protocol. If you're not familiar, to our listeners, is an auditory listening program developed by Stephen Porges, who created polyvagal theory, to help calm the vagus nerve and bring that fluidity back to the nervous system using the auditory system. And again, there is a relationship here, right? And so we can come at both from both directions. We can calm the vagus nerve, and we can support the reflex development so that we can meet in the middle. Limbic system's not ruling the day, child feels safe, and also we're developing all of these structures neurologically so that they don't have to drop back into limbic all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you, as a practitioner, what kind of questions do you ask? If you had a kid come to you like this, what are some of the questions that you would ask yourself or the parents to kind of ascertain where you would start? I would want to know. I would want to get a good handle on what their sensory processing was like. Are they auditorily sensitive? Do they need a lot of deep hugs? Do they are they like sensitive to quick movements? Does it scare them? Do they get car sick? Are they always leaning on things? Those kinds of things give me information about the sensory system.
The kind of kids that I work with emotional regulation, I often ask, are they problem solvers? Do they have an idea of what they want to do and then not want, like, very rigid? Are they rigid?
Yes.
Do they only want to do it their way? Some people might call them stubborn. I often meet very smart, inflexible kids who have figured out a way to do something, but it's not the easy way. And so so I would ask that. And then I watch how they move and I watch how they problem solve.
Well, since I work all remotely now,
Yeah.
I don't get to see them in person at first, so I ask a ton of questions. I think my intake questionnaire is like 5 pages of questions. So,
Smart.
but I get a really full picture of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'd want to know about their posture. Do they sit with, do they have like the C back when they sit, or do they pace a lot? Are we still stimming? Do they avoid social situations? All of those things give us information as practitioners about where to start.
Yeah, that helps me because I was thinking when I do an evaluation, I probably spend the first 15 minutes just watching and being in the same space. And I maybe ask 1 or 2 things, but I often engage in a lot of like parallel play or have them show me what they're doing. Like, what do they like to do? And all of that, I look at like, are they subtly asymmetrical? Are they always tilting their head? Do they ever put their hands down? Are they always on their feet? Have they sat down this whole time? Have they got up the whole time? Like I often just spend about 15 minutes just very quietly, like parallel engaging, but just watching. And that just gives me a lot of information from there. Like, do you wiggle every time your shirt touches you? Do you not like to be touched? If I try and touch your hand, do you immediately withdraw? Like, I do a lot of very subtle observing that you do because you're virtually in that. Like, your whole 5-page intake is probably my first 15 minutes of like of an evaluation. Yeah. That's interesting. Just different ways to do things. One of the things that I liked that we have last time we talked about, this was an amazing case study. And then what does it mean for like, how can this be helpful to others? So you talked about doing movement before demands. We like do some very gentle movement. Any other thoughts about how to like simple ways to help with emotional regulation or these pieces?
Yeah. Reducing sensory load is very helpful. We talked about this during the cognition podcast, but why do some kids do really well at home and they're completely emotionally dysregulated at school. And a lot of it's the sensory load, because at home, we create worlds that work for us, right? And as a parent, you create worlds that work for your children. But schools are not set up that way. They, as much as they try through IEPs and 504s, a school system is an industrial model, and there's hundreds of kids that go there. And so really, for the most part, kids have to conform to the system, even with small accommodations or variations. There is a conforming, and the sensory overload that happens there can be incredibly problematic for kiddos. So send them right into sympathetic. So finding ways to reduce that sensory load would be important, not just in school, but in everyday life. So what are some strategies you might give families to reduce sensory load?
Looking at like lighting, looking at, do you always have the TV on? Is music really loud? Are you always listening to music in the car? And sometimes it's hard because sometimes your sensory system wants music and sometimes you just need it to be quiet. Like I have a hard time with when restaurants have really loud music and people are talking and then I'm
Uh,
trying to
oh, yes.
so finding quieter places, and yes, there's headphones, but also just kind of finding places that are more set up and sensory friendly, like better lighting. I'm a big fan of going outside. I think outside is one of the most regulating ways and ways to decrease sensory load of like your nervous system wants to watch the leaves go by. It really does. So
Mhm.
being outside is one of my favorite ways to kind of reduce that sensory overload.
One of my grandkids will just go lay in the grass in the backyard. Just
Yes.
just say outside, and then she goes and just lays in the grass, and that's where she regulates. It's amazing.
She knows what's up.
It's a nature baby.
Any other thoughts on that?
Um, sensory load. I mean, you brought up some really good points. Like you don't have to have noise all the time, right? That's a big one, because the nervous system can only handle so many stimuli. So if you're asking a child to do something that's not a preferred activity, and they're also processing sound in the background and the barking dog and little sisters running through the room, and they've got a scratchy shirt on, and like, how do we kind of reduce that load so that the non-preferred activity doesn't feel overwhelming? Is there a way to peel some of that back? Yeah. We talked a little bit about co-regulation. What are some strategies that you provide to parents about co-regulation, since you see them in person?
A lot of talking about embrace and squeeze and being present is like my foundation piece. And so I often refer back to that of like, remember when you're doing embrace and squeeze and you're with them and you're breathing and it's like this deep, slow pressure. That's how, and I refer to that of like, use that strategy everywhere.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I often will suggest to parents that if their child is dysregulated, that they themselves can sit and hook up. So those are from Brain Gym.
Mm.
They're very easy. You just cross your arms and cross your legs. So like cross your arms across your chest, cross your legs, take a nice deep breath. For an added bonus, you can put your tongue on the roof of your mouth behind your teeth. So years ago, so many years ago, like 2008 or something, I had a boy come into my autism center. He had Down syndrome and autism. That is a tough combination. And he was so dysregulated, couldn't get him to sit. I mean, he's just pacing the whole time, pacing the whole time. And mom came in with big sister and a caregiver, like an in-home caregiver. And so I said, you know what, let's try something. Let's just sit down on the floor. So all four of the adults sat down on the floor, and we all just sat in hookups and breathed deeply. And it took about 10 minutes, but then all of a sudden he just plopped down on the floor. And a few minutes later, he fell over on his side. And then he just laid there on his side and played with a balloon. We were all regulated, and we were all sending off integrated energy which is the thing. We all have energy fields. It's science has support is proven this, that goes out like up to 16 feet from us, depending how strong our energy field is. So when everybody in the room was in an integrated state, the child felt it, picked up on it, and stopped pacing. So even if you're feeling dysregulated, take the moment, do some hookups, do some embracing squeeze on yourself. You can do it. You just cross your arms on your and grab your arm on the other side, and it's nice and slow. Nice squeeze. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slow release. Just let your hands sit there for a second. Move down the arms. Do it again. And I have done this activity. I did it for a Chamber of Commerce in California when I was there. All these business professionals, it was a large chamber. And we did this activity with hookups and positive points and embracing squeeze. And it was remarkable, the change in people's demeanor just from doing this, having them think of something that was incredibly stressful and then figure out where they were feeling it in their body. Like, is your jaw tight? Are your shoulders tight? Is your breathing shallow? Is your stomach hurting? And then just doing hookups and embracing squeeze for 90 seconds and then trying to think of the thing again. 95% of the people in that room couldn't even conjure up the thought of the thing that was bothering them. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's so fun. So I really can't say enough about regulating yourself so that you can help your child co-regulate. It's a really important tool. Okay, what else could we do to support our kiddos with emotional dysregulation as we move through this process? Any other thoughts, Angela?
I'm a big fan of play and outside of, I think that we spend a lot of time inside.
Yeah.
And I've met a lot of families. And again, I know we have different clientele, but I've met a lot of families that tell me if we don't get outside during the day, it becomes a lot harder at night. And I think that that's really true of fresh air. Again, breathing, like the opportunity to breathe. And there's something about going outside that allows everybody's nervous system to pause and enjoy. So
she's laughing because Pamela Curley paused.
Yes. What about you, Mary?
Yes to outdoors, and we are fortunate, and then we live in the Pacific Northwest, so it's the land of trees and rivers here. So there's always a beautiful place to be, right?
Yes,
and I know that
true.
some people live in inner cities or that don't have a lot of green space around them, so that becomes a little bit more challenging. So understand that completely. And then another thing that's very regulated to the brain is rhythmic activities, whether that's like actual rocking from RMTI or rocking in a rocking chair. Walking is a rhythmic activity. Clapping and tapping. Clapping to a song, stomping our feet to a song, clapping to a metronome, bouncing a ball in rhythm. All of those things are actually quite calming to the brain. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those are a few things I can think of.
Well, I think we've covered a lot. And Mary, thank you for bringing us this specific case study and being willing to share your process. Thanks. And I know it's going to be helpful to a lot of different people. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Any parting thoughts I just thank you to our listeners. And you guys are all been wonderful.
No, I really appreciate everybody who's listening and the really positive feedback we've been getting. And I appreciate the suggestions for future episodes. We have a long list that we've created of episodes that we want to get through. And we talk about that all the time, what our next priority is. And you can always reach either of us through the contact information that Angela provides when she uploads the podcast. And our podcasts, again, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. So you can find us all those places.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Mary. And
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You can email us at brainsinmotionpodcast brain-works@gmail.com. You can find Mary at her website, brain-works.org, or on Facebook with her Facebook Reflex Integration groups. If you would like that information, please check our show notes. And you can find Angela at angelapt.com or rainbowdragonbooks.com. Thanks for listening.